All right, so welcome to ITSA Live, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern. Today is a special time, so it's just doing it Monday and not Wednesday this week. And we talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with people who are making them happen. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for unconditional or universal basic income. It's the idea that every individual in society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. Today we have a special guest, Salim Ismail, and we'll be discussing the idea of an exponential organization, how Comingle may or may not fall into that category, how it's being designed to do so, and what it could mean for UBI. Salim is a founder at OpenXO, a best-selling author of Exponential Organizations, board member at XPRIZE, and founding executive director at Singularity University. Salim has been building disruptive digital companies as a serial entrepreneur since the early 2000s. As a prolific speaker, Salim gives more than 150 talks a year to audiences of all sizes around the world. He's been profiled across a vast array of media outlets, including the New York Times, Bloomberg Businessweek, Fortune, Forbes, Wired, Vogue, and the BBC. Salim is a sought-after strategist and a renowned technology entrepreneur who built and sold his company to Google. I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth, co-founders of Comingle. They're on here as UBI Guy and Comingler One. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. Josh, can you tell people about what Comingle is all about?
Of course, yeah. Comingle is a money-sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. So the result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. And yeah, if you want to know more, you can learn all about it at comingle.us.
And I should mention the crowdfund. We did a crowdfund throughout the month of October and hit our target of $75,000, which allows us to keep the crowdfund open. At this point, where are we at? We have raised almost $81,000 from 660 backers. And the momentum from that has also enticed some other funding commitments to the ITSA Foundation at the same time. So the main push that we're doing in terms of crowdfunding and people raising is getting as many backers as we can to the list. So we're turning this into a real grassroots effort through the campaign. So if you want to follow along and join in, one of the great ways to do it is go into the Indiegogo campaign page. There's a link that I've posted under Scott's main link for this space with all the different ways to get involved, including the crowdfund.
So yeah, go and pitch in $1 just to get your name on the list.
Thanks, Conrad. Thanks, Josh. So I'd like to start off these with a little bit of recent basic income news, like a last week in UBI kind of thing. And so before we start talking with Salim, just want to uplift a couple things that I think people should know that happened most recently. And it's a little bit unusual this time because we usually do this every Wednesday. But since we're doing this on Monday, then we last covered this on Wednesday. So it's really only been like a couple days. But in that time, there's still been some interesting things I wanted to uplift. So first of all, I think it's really interesting that Stephen Poloz, which is the former governor of the Bank of Canada, has been talking about the need for basic income in Canada in order to get through the coming technological disruption that he sees. So, like, I'll talk a little bit about what he's been saying, because I think it's interesting to you how he's framing it. But just so people like in the U.S. know, this is essentially like if Janet Yellen were to start talking about the need for basic income. Like that would be very big news here for the former head of the Fed to be talking like that. So the way that he's talking about, like, I think it's very interesting how that he's described it as one of the best economic automatic stabilizers, and even though he's stressing that he believes that there will, be a net creation of jobs, despite all the impacts of AI and robots, he does believe that there needs to be this basic income in place in order to successfully manage that transition. He says that he says, I think basic income may be the direction that we need to go. But I would still question the ability of politics to get there. It's just you can't really get people to agree on enough. You can't really get that consensus. So he's also acknowledging that even though basic income would be really important for this transition, that he questions if governments can actually pull it off. So I think that's also puts kind of uplifts the Comingle approach to just getting something done immediately outside of government, because who knows what government is going to be able to do. But this is a former head of the central bank talking about the positive economics of basic income. So very, very interesting to see that. And another bit of news, and this is also out of Canada too, there's just a lot of activity in Canada recently, is that the province of Newfoundland and Labrador has announced that they're launching a basic income program for residents aged 60 to 64. So this is particularly interesting. It would be like if, say, California were to introduce Social Security for those starting at age 60 to kind of cover that gap. So it's almost like here where we're talking even like around the world of like increasing the Social Security ages. This is the opposite of that. They're saying, no, we need to actually make sure that people can access this economic security at a younger age. And so in Canada too, they essentially already have a basic income guarantee for seniors and children. And this is basically, shrinking the group down of those without a basic income guarantee. So you can imagine, you drop it down to 60 first, you drop it down to 50, drop it down to 40. Like there are different ways of approaching a basic income over time. And this happens to be the approach of let's just like essentially enable people to retire at earlier years, or at least start receiving that income.
Yeah, that is a popular pitch for UBI as Social Security for all.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty good. Yeah, like where the retirement age is 0. Yeah.
Right.
Retire from involuntary work.
Right.
Yeah, and again, like in Canada, kids already have it too. So many parents in Canada are, since they already have what we had in the form of the enhanced child tax credit, and they've had that for years now. So yeah, it's just a matter of how do you actually provide this basic income floor to those between the ages of 18 and whatever the retirement age is. Another interesting thing too about this, so not only are they essentially helping more and younger seniors, but also they're boosting their child programs too. So again, there's the Canada Child Benefit, and they're looking to boost that at a more local, provincial level to get even more money to kids through their parents. And I think it's also interesting how they're pitching this too as a way of simplifying the existing programs where they have like 30 different programs and at that provincial level, and they're looking to reduce that to 6. So they're looking to really simplify this too. So yeah, just very interesting to see this development and at kind of the more local level like that. And from that approach, which I haven't seen a whole lot of, say, basic income pilots where they're looking to fill that gap and say, start at age 55 or something and aiming for 55 to 65. That kind of thing to show how impactful that could be.
This is creeping towards universalism.
Right. Yeah, it's like you can either approach universalism with a fully universal small amount and then grow it over time, or it can have like a full-on like amount of basic income and then just provide that to more and more people over time. So yeah, that's kind of the two different approaches.
So the comment earlier about that Canada doesn't quite have the political the guy you were talking about was saying that the likelihood of the government being able to provide some basic income. Do you think that's talking more about like the government as like the politics of it, or the political will of the people behind it? You know what I mean?
I think he was talking about the politics of it. It's just saying how difficult it is to get to reach a consensus. Is what he had,
right. Okay.
Said.
And they go hand in hand too.
Yeah.
Common adage that politicians aren't leaders, they're followers.
Right, but I mean, there's points where like the political will is there, but there's such ineptitude in the government itself that like the political will can't be activated. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just wondering, but Canada's they're making steps.
Yeah, things are really active in Canada right now. They've even got their 2 bills in the House and Senate looking to essentially, figure out some kind of implementation plan.
Yeah.
It's a race.
Yeah, we'll see if Canada wins that race or not, but they're certainly in the running. So yeah, so that's it for the news, and maybe we can seed a little bit of the conversation with that too, especially since this is again, this is the former head of the Central Bank in Canada talking about the disruptive impacts of technology on the economy and the need for basic income. So with that, Salim, thank you for joining us today. And just as a note for everyone else too, we'll be talking with Salim till the end of the hour. And you're welcome to ask questions via replies. We won't be uplifting anyone to speakers in this first hour, and then the next hour we will be inviting people to ask questions and provide their comments and just be part of the discussion.
We should check in with you, Salim, what your time availability is. Sometimes people have half an hour or an hour. Sometimes they stay for the second hour. So just let us know.
Sure. First of all, great to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
The AV stuff. I was on a presentation a week ago and I spoke for about 8 minutes, and then I realized.
Oh no!
So just clearing that up first. I can stick around for most of that second hour. I may have to go maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way through, but I'm here.
Oh great!
Oh, great. Yeah, it's fun to have the audience pipe up too.
Yeah.
How should we start? I'm thinking about how the way I met Salim is through the way a lot of people meet a lot of people in the UBI movement. Is Giselle Huff made the connection. She's a lovely woman who. What was the conference that you were at? It was something about abundance, right, Salim?
Yeah, it was Abundance 360 that Peter Diamandis puts together every year, talking through how we're navigating this transition from scarcity to abundance.
Yeah,
And
Andrew Yang spoke at that one too, right?
Yes, that's right. And I interviewed Andrew about this a couple of years ago, and I'm thrilled that he brought it up to a presidential level, the issue. It's just tragic to see such little effort, follow through, and not enough experiments being run to check it out. It might be useful if I give my history with UBI and a little framing of how we think about it. Is that helpful?
Sounds great.
Yeah, sure.
So, for those of you, those who aren't aware, I spent 7 years building out Singularity University, where I was the founding CEO, and I ran all the programs for a few years. And somewhere around 2012, if I get it right, maybe 2013, Gerald Huff, who's Giselle's son, who tragically passed away, and along with a few of our folks, did a kind of a closed event, about 80 people, on the future of work. Tony Robbins was there, and UBI obviously came up as a concept. And I'd heard the term bounce around. It was the first time we went into detail on it. And we looked at 14 different experiments that had been run over the years on UBI. And, I went through the thinking that kind of the transition that people go through. First, you think it's a socialist thing. Then you realize it's a libertarian thing. Then you think, well, it can't really work. And then you look at it and go, oh my God, it really does work. And there was a very clear correlation. The closer you came to U, B, and I, the more successful the program was in the 14 experiments that we saw.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty incredible. And that's like a pretty reasonable decent number. I think the big challenge that as I've watched over the years is that it's for governments who you would expect to embrace and implement this thing. It's antithetical to government in many ways, because once you implement it, you actually radically reduce the need for government. And government's kind of like, so they make it not universal, they make it not basic, they make it not an income, and pretty quickly you're in a child tax credit administered for low-income families, and you're in administrative help. So I think the big challenge is getting governments to keep their sticky paws off it and make it as U and as B and as I as possible. So I put out a tweet that you guys may have seen last week that said Canada, because I'm actually Canadian, so I can yell at them about this. I think Canada has not only the opportunity, but actually the obligation to do it. The last piece I'll say is I've been tracking some of what we've influenced some of Elon's thinking on this. And he's been talking about universal high income, forget basic, which is great, which he thinks AI could deliver, which it well could. But I'd kind of like to see us walk before we can run. So let's get the damn thing implemented somewhere, anywhere, in a pervasive way. And that demonstrates to the rest of the world how powerful it is.
I think when people, and part of all of our work with ITSA Foundation, Comingle, and Bootstraps is about getting a really holistic understanding of the concept and the mechanisms in place. And when people really understand it, it becomes clear that the U is the most important of those three: the U, the B, and the I. And people get focused on what does B mean, and like how much is basic or livable or whatever. And then I is like everyone can sort of agree in the movement that it's direct cash. But people very easily seem to throw out the U if they're coming maybe newly to the space, or it's like, well, as long as we're giving cash and we're targeting it at people that need it the most, then that seems more efficient, right? And what they're missing is sort of the radical efficiency of giving it to everybody first, and using the systems we have in place to claw it back from those who don't need it, but getting rid of, by doing that, all of the bureaucracy and all of the humiliating and inefficient steps that represent those governmental sticky paws that kind of break every good idea or good intention anyway in implementation.
Well, this is what we refer to a lot as the immune system. I first came across this issue when I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, running their incubator. And I came across a really annoying problem that the more disruptive an idea we came up with, the less the company could handle it. And it was super frustrating because, like, hey, you you hired me to do disruptive stuff, and then when I come up with something or my team does, you guys can't handle it. What the hell, right? And you then look at it and go, wow, this is pervasive across every company in the world. When you introduce disruptive innovation, the antibodies attack you because all of our organizations and all of our institutions are architected for predictability and for efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about it with either fundraising, foundations with wide radical ambitions in their language. If you present something radical and ambitious, they very quickly
they just can't take it, right?
Yeah,
and this is I think the structural issue that we've been focused on is how do you. So I came out of Singularity basically going, wow, we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. And then you get this Luddite revolt in the public sector where you have bankers fighting Bitcoin and you have taxis fighting Uber and you have entrenched interests fighting UBI, and that we just aren't able to progress society because of this issue. So we've actually been focusing on solving that problem, which we believe we've now cracked. By the way, we now have tool sets for solving this stuff. The problem is getting enough capability out there and doing it in a different way. The challenge, the way we found to solve it is you don't do disruptive things in the core organization or institution, you do it at the edge. And the problem is when you're talking about something that's socially so pervasive, the edge is harder to get to because everything is in the core. Public sector is kind of basically is the core, right? So how do you get to the edge on that? And so even running experiments on that are incredibly hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't mind getting right into it. If the government isn't going to be helping with if the UBI is too disruptive to government as it exists now, what are the options? And is a technological solution seem viable? Because now it's in the private sector. So I'm talking about what we're trying at Comingle. Like we're basically a private sector entity trying to make a dent in something that the government normally would be expected to handle.
Yeah. And I think that's the only place it'll happen, at least until you gather enough evidence to demonstrate it. And this is okay. I mean, this is why SpaceX was able to succeed where NASA wasn't. Private sector can take on risks that public sector cannot handle, right? The difficulty is even if you have the evidentiary basis for it, of which there's considerable now you're still stuck with this cultural immune system problem. And vested interests and market structures, et cetera, that are all against you. And so it takes a very brave politician, policymaker. There's the famous Manitoba example, which you guys, I think, I'm sure, are very aware of, where they tried it out for a while. It was succeeding so well, the government realized, we're basically not even noticed that we exist. And literally the next administration shut the whole thing down. And that's just so annoying. That you do something like that.
These are the strings attached when it's run through the government, just like the one in Ontario. They were having a pilot, and then the changing of the guard, the new Ford administration shut it down, even like ripping people out of it who had been promised it for another year and upending their lives and their plans. This is what's so appealing to me about the private sector version we're doing, where it's almost like we're not giving them an option to shut us down, and we're not making ourselves there's no strings attached to what we're doing. We're not taking government funding. Everyone who's participating is entirely voluntary. There's not really any case anyone can make. It's like we're a group of people sharing our money with each other the way that we feel like doing it.
I'm such a huge fan of what you guys are trying to do at Comingle. I think it's absolutely critical and critically important. The challenge, it basically boils down to trust, right? If you can trust the government not to mess with the program once it's started, and then you can start making future predictions. It may be better in a private foundation model like you guys are trying, that's where you have to start, because you just don't have the trust in government to do the right thing.
And you have to demonstrate, like the government only thinks in that sticky paws way, and a lot of us only think in that way. It's like sort of our inherent, intuition about how things have to work, whereas a model that's entirely built on trust is sort of, even though like someday I believe it will be intuitive to people now, it is counterintuitive. So you have to first demonstrate at scale the working model of that before people will really buy into it.
I think that's the key difference in point of is this issue of scalability. When you look at, when you look at pilot experiments in general that are organized or funded or at least overseen or something by governments, you could just do it for a few years and it'll be a success, like it always is a success. And then, what do you do? And so, at a local area, maybe they'll try to keep it going. Maybe they'll try to scale it up from city to state or something. But it all depends on politicians and, just the way the winds are blowing politically. Yeah. And even at the national level, like with the enhanced child tax credit, you see that for 6 months, but it wasn't able to scale up and, continue on to be a permanent program. But when it comes to a program like Comingle, then the scalability is built in just from, word of mouth, from success, from people wanting to be a part of it, stay a part of it, get more people into it. All the incentives with something like the Comingle structure is actually to just get bigger and bigger over time and to last indefinitely. And hopefully that will actually help spark the necessary support for basic income at the political level where people are demanding it and where politicians realize that, if it's not something they support, then they're not going to win support themselves.
Mm-hmm. Salim, you mentioned the cultural immune system. Is that what you?
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Expand. That sounds interesting.
What I mean by that,
a handy concept.
So it operates at individual level and at group level, which is that if you're suddenly presented with something very it goes right back to the concept of the amygdala, right? We all have this little organ at the back of our brain that's constantly scanning for danger. And we evolved this when we were running on the plains of Africa. Back then, if you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran because bad news could kill you. Good news does not kill you. So if I missed a piece of good news, I might miss some fruit that I could eat. If I missed a piece of bad news, I literally died. So it turns out we're 10 times more likely to pay attention to bad news than good news because of the ancient survival risk. This is why Fox News does very well. If you watch Fox News, you're going to die this week, right? If you're really lucky, you'll last till next week. But then you're going to die one way or the other. And so they put the fear of God into you, which keeps attention. Peter Diamandis calls CNN the crisis news network, right? When you can track every bank robbery in real time, high definition, streamed to 20 devices, you think the world is going to hell. You vote on that. And the broader translation of what we're talking about here is when people come across something very new, the initial reaction and response to it is danger and threat.
Yeah.
And so when you first come across autonomous cars, often the initial response is, oh my God, that car might kill somebody. We should kind of ban the car. Because we don't want to be killed by robots. We'd much rather be killed by drunk people.
Like I just got my bearings in the way things are. I don't know
exactly.
about adjusting.
Now, when you're thrown very new concepts like UBI, it's immediately related to as an unknown, which means it triggers the amygdala, and then you get this. And so that's at the individual biological level, but the same pattern exists at a group level. When any group or institution is presented with something radically new, their initial response becomes very French, and they go, no, pas possible, and everything stops. And you have to overcome that resistance because we can kind of handle it now at individual level. We're pretty good at running programs like NLP or Tony Robbins type programs, or at the extreme level, you go get some psychedelics and you're good. You can unlearn old patterns. But we do not have the equivalent of psychedelics at a group level or an institutional level. Right? I've identified a bunch of immune systems at institutional level. For example, journalism.
I want to go back to that in a minute, but go ahead. I want to keep going, but yeah.
So for example, journalism. You try and update journalism, and everybody freaks out, right? Same with education. Academia is like the second worst immune system. Lord help you if you try and update that. The worst is probably religion, where they'll kill you if you don't follow orthodoxy. And we've seen this kind of at escalating levels in different places. When I finished Singularity and after I wrote the book, we basically set about solving that problem, because we figured if you can't solve that problem, it doesn't matter what the breakthroughs are, we can't implement them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's kind of figure out a tool set. So we started with big companies and private sector because it's easier to start there. And we crafted a 10-week engagement that we now call an EXO sprint. We piloted it with Procter & Gamble and said, let's see if we can hack culture at scale. And it worked. In fact, it worked so well, we thought maybe we got lucky, maybe we caught them at the right time, etc. Maybe they're pretty advanced. So we did it a second time with the largest insurance company in Mexico, which is family-owned, regulated. Insurance is backward by itself. And it worked even better. Now we've done it 60 times with Black & Decker, HP, Visa, and we've found this very reliable process framework to break legacy thinking and transform culture at scale. About 5 years ago, we created a nonprofit to do that in public sector. Because now we have confidence it works, the process works. Can we now apply it to public sector, which is harder because the existing policy is the immune system, right? As you guys well know more than most. So we created a nonprofit and adapted the process. Turns out it takes 16 weeks in public sector because it's harder, but it works. And we've done it 7 times, most notably with the mayor of Miami. And we got public sector in Miami to view new and disruptive technologies as an opportunity rather than a threat. And a lot of the buzz around Miami the last few years we believe is because of this program we ran that changed the way public sector views disruptive technologies.
Well, what's some of that buzz? Because I'm uninformed. Like what happened in Miami?
Miami is one of the hottest cities in the world the last 5-7 years to go live in, move to, etc. The mayor said he wants to be paid in Bitcoin. They're trying to embrace crypto as much as they can, notwithstanding SEC crap. Huge numbers of Silicon Valley people and new people from New York have moved down to Miami the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, the perception of that town has changed a lot. Just for me, at least, like I don't know where that came from, but now it sounds like maybe it came from some work you were doing.
Were pretty, yeah. We
Amazing.
believe, not complete, obviously, but we believe it was a pretty major. It's a subconscious state change,
right?
You know, in the same way that NLP or Tony Robbins programs change your subconscious state, we've learned how to do that at the organizational and institutional level. So I think the way that we could think about rolling out UBI is you gather the experiments that have been done for which there's now compelling evidence, and then run this fast track type process on a public sector environment and change the mentality around it, and then get them to do it. And it may be that emerging markets are the right place to do it. For example, Guyana just discovered a massive, maybe one of the largest light crude oil deposits off their coast. So they're in the next 5 years, they're about to go from the poorest country in Latin America to the richest country in the world. And that's a place where, as they're thinking about it, we're advising the president, et cetera. Yeah. And as we think about that's one of the places where you think about, hey, put this in early, how you do it. I'll give you another example where we've seen this at an approximate level, which is Botswana. They were the poorest country in Africa until 30 years ago when they discovered the most profitable diamond mine in the world. And they did an amazing job in not becoming a corrupt petrostate type model, and were able to move the benefits of that diamond mine into the whole country. And they kind of offer a UBI type structure there, healthcare. If anybody gets into Oxford or Harvard or MIT, they actually pay for them to go to university and attend. And they've created an now they're the second richest country in Africa.
Well,
yeah, it seems like when Alaska discovered their oil, I mean, they did the very smart approach of going, okay, there's actually a lot of natural resource wealth here. What should we do with it? Who should it benefit? And, how do you actually make this permanent? Because this is, something you dig it all the ground and then it's done. And then what happens then? Yeah. So yeah, it was very smart to set up the sovereign wealth fund and go, hey, let's just make sure that we convert at least some of this revenue into this permanent fund. And because that fund is invested, then it should pay a dividend. And who should get the dividend? Well, let's make sure Everybody gets it universally. Yeah.
That's right. And now this takes enlightened leadership, which is non-trivial. But it when it's implemented, it can work. And we've seen now the results of that. When you make a major bet on something like this, the results are profound at an entire societal level. I think, and here's where I get super excited over the last few years. When you take some of the innovations in the token world, where you can take assets that are in the ground and tokenize those and make them and capitalize those, you could essentially borrow against some of those, which is essentially the basis of a sovereign wealth fund, and then provide a UBI to citizens at very, very low cost in a very powerful way.
Yeah, I want to go back a bit to the immune system stuff, because I really do think that's really interesting, and there's a lot of multiple avenues to explore that. Two things I'm thinking of that I'd like to get into is first of all, like, I see basic income as being this kind of immune system regulator, let's say, and that's the challenge of it, is that without a basic income, then let's say the immune response is much larger and damaging. So the immune response in terms of society can be, say, loss of faith in democracy, increase in authoritarianism, this kind of just everything that mass anxiety and stress leads to across society. And the catch-22 with basic income is, how do you get this immune system regulator in place such that society can handle these technologies and changes better, where at the same time the prospect of something new and different like that can trigger that immune system?
Yeah. So this is a great point. It's critical, because as we introduce new ideas, call it CRISPR, call it flying cars, call it whatever, or breakthrough new medical technologies that are coming down the pike, you want people to feel as safe and secure in the face of that uncertainty. Maybe the biggest insight I've ever had about human beings is people would much rather be comfortable than happy.
Right. Yeah. Security.
Right. And they're comfortable in the current structures and patterns that they have. And and as we can see in the Middle East, they'll die for it. And then they end up with a pretty ugly life as a result. And so how can you navigate this in a more elegant way? And if you can cover the bottom couple of levels of Maslow's hierarchy, which is essentially what UBI does, the sense of stability and all that, medical bankruptcies in the US are an obvious. I mean, it blows my mind as a Canadian. I remember once interviewing the head of Google Health at a conference of about 500 people. And I said to him, look, I'm Canadian. Please explain the US healthcare system. Right. And he was like, oh, it's pretty simple, actually. The US healthcare system is designed to get you sick and keep you sick as long as possible without killing you. And I'm, shocked.
I mean, that's great for GDP.
Exactly. I'm totally shocked. And the entire audience says, yep, that's about right. Everybody's nodding their heads. And I'm like, I can't believe he just actually said that. Like, that's actually true. And how the hell do you tolerate that? But, and then when something magical or massively obvious, like Obamacare, Romney care, whatever comes along, everybody's fighting it tooth and nail for those legacy reasons, right? And so you have to cut through all of that cruft and navigate this new model. The challenge is, this is where stuff like blockchain becomes so powerful because of the decentralized authentication. But the immune system, I think, is the worst problem. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about at the extreme level. Do you guys know the economist Hernando de Soto?
No.
He's a Peruvian guy who did a lot of work on property rights for poor people. Probably will win the Nobel Prize for Economics at some point for his work. He went to the government of the Honduras. He got very excited about blockchain, and he did some calculations, and he worked out if you just put land titles on the blockchain and just did that, nothing else, Global real estate is about 300 trillion in the world. You would release about 10% of that into the global economy, like something like 30 trillion, just by having transparency and referenceability and reliability of who owns what piece of land, just that. So he actually got the government in Honduras to sponsor this project and put land titles on the blockchain in the Honduras. And they got to step like 8 out of 10. It was kind of like just about finished up. They were getting ready to go live with it. And all of a sudden, the government realized and said, wait a minute, and came to the realization that if they implemented this, the government would not be authoritative over who owned what land. It would be the blockchain, which meant that you couldn't have corruption. And within weeks, the whole thing got canceled. Right. And that, and why? Because like their livelihood depended on it in many cases in dodgy countries. So this is, I think, the big issue, obviously much more subtle in Western countries, etc. But governments get paid to exist, and they like to exist, and they find ways and reasons subconsciously of expanding the need for government, because clearly we need more control and more regulatory in various places.
That kind of reinforces some of the decisions we're making in the design of Comingle to gradually put the power from founders, us as co-founders and things, to a system that decentralizes that power and sort of gives it in a more of a cooperative way to the members, like build it and then step out of the way. Because the longer we're holding on to it, the more vulnerable it is to, like,
yes,
we change our minds. What if we die? Whatever. It's like we need to set up a system where the power cannot be re-centralized or sold off in some way that benefits individuals.
This is the difficulty of DAOs, where ideally it's a great structure, but implementing it is very non-trivial.
Yeah, that's something we want to dive into. It's a project we want to take on, but we're going to try this one first. But you kind of raise another point of we're sort of up against this other aspect of the cultural immune system that maybe was working to our benefit. So, like a lot of ideas like blockchain and cryptocurrency have like kind of proven themselves that maybe we should have been more skeptical of them, or that's like the amount of like kind of hype around them, that the hype being like the point at which we overcame our immune response to a concept and instead became super excited about it, and like got so excited that we stopped paying attention to what was really happening, and like you see that happening with a lot of like tech startups where it's like the excitement over Theranos is super huge to the point where people ignore that it's not really working, right? So now there's like this sort of other side of it that a company like us is up against, that now there's some skepticism there of like
it's too good to be true.
Yeah, right. So,
yeah, it's really unfortunate. I think when I look at the crypto world, the sheer pace of value creation creates a huge amount of greed and then you get a whole bunch of used car salesmen out there, and that it kind of spoils the space for everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very unfortunate because the underlying value, this is, I think, what creates the Gartner hype cycle, right? You guys are familiar with that?
I've heard of it, but yeah, refresh.
So the Gartner hype cycle is this curve where some technology takes off, and everybody goes, "Oh my God, that's like say 3D printing. Oh my God, 3D printing, unbelievable! It's everything in the world will be amazing. How many rooms in your house will have a 3D printer?" Was like one crazy commentary that came out, and then you realize, okay, this doesn't quite meet it hits reality, and then there's this massive what they call a trough of disillusionment. And everybody goes, "Oh my God!" And then you get into the opposite sentiment. We've been going, "That'll never work." It was a complete hype. It was a total disaster. And then it starts getting implemented, and little by little gets to a point way higher than the original peak of expectations. Just nobody notices because it just became pervasive. And it turns out every technology goes through that kind of a hype cycle. right? So we're 3D printing, for example, is now in coming out of that curve where nobody's noticing, but little by little, think crazy things are being done, like 3D printed rocket engines and so amazing stuff like that. Crypto is just right now coming out of that hype, the bottom trough of hype cycle.
Right.
And I have a clear kind of thesis on this if we're only to cover it. But why are digital currencies interesting, and what needs to make it work? There's three. Imagine a triangle with 3 points on it. And you have to hit all 3 points for it to work properly. The first is decentralization. The second is security. And the third is scalability. And you need to kind of hit all three. What Bitcoin did for the first time in digital currency history is it hit decentralization and security at the same time. Nobody'd ever done that before. And so that created kind of the first initial wave of buzz. All the altcoins then popped up saying, okay, we're going to solve the scalability problem. But in doing so, they compromised on decentralization, or they compromised on security. And hence the FTX or Luna or the other big crashes that we've seen is they all compromised on one of the bottom two.
Why did they compromise? Was it a fundraising sort of compromise? Or
for example, FTX we thought was decentralized, but it really wasn't. Right? We thought it was secure, and it really wasn't. People's funds were being used for the wrong purposes. Because it wasn't decentralized, nobody could tell that the funds were being misused. Whereas in a truly decentralized world, you'd know instantly where the funds were going and why it was a bit dodgy, right? Or you have security where people are hacking things and it's not that secure in a particular way. Smart contracts on Ethereum, for example, have a lot of holes in them, and people are get fleeced for their savings or whatever because of smart contract phishing attempts and so on. So you have to do, but where things got really exciting for me was about 2 years ago. They introduced the Lightning Network on Bitcoin, which makes Bitcoin actually scalable. So Bitcoin now hits all three of those buttons. And so the smartest people in the world that I know are putting all of their money in Bitcoin now because they're like, this is it. Pretty much everything else is a gamble, and Bitcoin is a clear bet. So if you look at that and you roll that out towards a broader administrative function like UBI, it makes it infinitely easier to implement once you have it. So one of the conversations I've been having with some of the Bitcoin whales is, what would it be like to have a city-based UBI with Bitcoin as the basis, and just the yield on the Bitcoin providing the basis for that UBI?
Yeah, Comingle was, we originally thought of it as being needing a token to go with it. But then it seemed like that was actually not really going to pan out. So, or there was just something. It seemed like, well, why can't we just use regular money? Because and we ended up with that because that's how people think of money. Right?
That's right.
And it's just, and I think you can see the clear one-to-one value between what you earn from your job and where it's going to another person. And I think there's something really important about that.
And I think de-risking UBI in an early stage is dead on. Yeah. Because you don't need there's enough question marks and concerns, etc., in the concept of UBI to then introduce another concept of crypto.
Right? Yeah. I guess that's pretty much what it was. You can't introduce two crazy ideas at once.
In those circles too, like there's all those levels of ways things can get compromised, and in those circles of like fundraising with the higher net worth crowds and the crypto crowds, there's a lot of push to like, oh, you need to do this with the crypto token. And I've become very wary of a lot of those where my general idea is cash is king right now. Someone who needs money gets cash, they can go buy a sandwich or do their laundry.
That's right.
Whereas they can't do that with a crypto wallet. It's not pervasive enough. It could crash and be valueless. And having the Sisyphean hurdle of getting UBI going and coupling that with like tying it to a specific coin and getting that going. In my mind, it's like we figure out the mechanism, we figure out the math, and then if there becomes a really stable, cryptocurrency someday that's trustworthy and proves itself as such and is widespread, we can switch it in as a different currency. But why? Yeah,
I think this is exactly the right path. Stick with the most de-risk situation for the time being. But having said that, there's massive risk in the monetary system as we have it today. If you're aware of that, with all the debt that's happening, right? I don't know if you've seen what some of Jeff Booth's work,
Yeah.
The Price of Tomorrow, and so on, right? For the folks that haven't,
he argues for deflation.
Yeah, he made this observation that over the last 50 years, every dollar increase in global GDP has come with a $4 increase in global debt. I mean, it's just the most staggering statistic. So basically, we're growing the global economy with debt, and that's structural. It can't be kind of written off, and so we're essentially taxing future generations at the most unbelievable level. And at some point, that's got to collapse. Because when they created the monetary systems, they didn't realize that technology was deflationary and that your $1,000 TV would deliver twice as much functionality in a year.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a key understanding is that technology is deflationary. And, this is actually also why, when people wonder, oh, how do we pay for basic income? I don't like that question because, first of all, I look at this from an actual resources kind of situation where, the question is not how do you pay for it? You create money out of nothing, just like, create cryptocurrency out of nothing. These are all just effectively points. The question is, what do these points represent? What can you buy with the money? What do you have the resources? Do you have the economic capacity? Like, these are the actual questions to be asking. And as technology improves, then you actually have this deflationary pressure, such that it makes it's even easier to, quote unquote, print money for basic income in a deflationary environment, because that's just, you have this it's pushing down on the value of the currency, and if you don't do that, then you run into problems from just everything costing more. But this concern.
An indexed UBI is an easy way of mitigating that.
Yeah.
And you can have an algorithmic approach to that where the price of the basics is going to be X, and you just match the UBI to that. That keeps you free of the vagaries of that chaos.
And I would also prefer to index it to actual growth, because we should be seeing this as, as we automate the economy, where should the value of that, economic growth go to? As the economy can do more and more, less is less, we should see it as a dividend. We should make sure that people are constantly better and better off. And if they see the UBI as effectively their productivity dividend, then automation is a good thing.
Yeah,
you're less worried, and you're saying, well, actually, let's automate as much as we possibly can, because that means that grows the overall value of my basic income to, what Elon referred to as this high income. Like,
right.
As long as the economy is growing and everyone's sharing in it, then great. Let's just make sure that benefits everybody.
That's a great point, Scott, that UBI actually makes people less scared of automation. Right?
Yeah.
You're like, hell, automate the hell out of my job. Go for
it.
Right. That's dampening the immune system.
Yeah.
And we have an overactive immune system right now, with people worried about what happens to their jobs. And even that worry has ramifications. And, that actually has health ramifications, where people's health actually degrades because of just worrying about the loss of their job.
Yeah. Can I address that for a second?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've done some research on this. The first article that appeared that said AI or robots would take all the jobs in 5 years appeared in 1964.
Yeah, it's been around for a while.
Like, this is kind of a crazy. And
Martin Luther King was talking about it too.
Every few years, it pops up again. And the best example we've seen of the kind of total opposite of this thinking is bank tellers. So when we created ATM machines, like there was all this hand wringing going, oh my God, millions of bank tellers will be out of work. What do we do with all these bank tellers? Except what actually happened was the cost of running a branch dropped by like 10x, and the banks created 10 times more branches. And the number of bank tellers hasn't changed at all. And we see it repeatedly in society. When we introduce technological innovation, we don't lose jobs. We just increase capacity.
Well, we also increase inequality, though, too.
Massively, because
Yeah.
the quality of that work, right? We're going through that same debates happening right now in the trucking industry, where people are going, wow, 3 million truckers and related jobs are at risk because we're going to automate trucking pretty soon. Whereas if you talk to any trucking company, they're like, I would hire 1,000 drivers right now. I just don't have any capacity. We need automated truck driving to happen to deliver anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're at the end of the first hour, but I think getting into we'd be wrong to not get deeper into the AI question with you while you're here. So where do you think we're at in terms of like the sort of cultural immunoresponse to AI as a concept? Like,
Yeah, so I think the immune response is very, very high in terms of government saying, oh my God, we have to regulate this, and certain actors saying we should regulate this, etc. I take comfort in in two things. The first is that having looked into this at detail, and we have access to the top experts in the world on the AI side, there's no mechanism for governments to regulate this, like zero. They don't have a hope in hell of doing it because the horse left the barn like ages ago on that. So that's one. Because, for example, if you say you can only do it with a data set of less than or more than say 2 billion parameters has to be regulated. Well, now they can do the same training with 1 billion parameters 6 months later. So the minute they put any regulation in place, it'll be out of date. The other reason I see this totally fascinating, I was talking to the head of AI incubators at MIT a couple of weeks ago. He's watching 400 AI startups, and he is freaked out because his comment was, what I'm seeing is 1,000 times powerful coming next year that we have this year. Like 1,000, forget 10x.
Right.
We're seeing 1,000-fold increase per year now in AI capability. And it's going to move so fast that they won't have time to regulate it. It'll just happen. So that's the good news. It means also the need to get to a UBI is really, really critical because we'll have massive problems out there very, very quickly. For example, India, right? 200 million software developers will be in major risk because maintaining software, which is largely what they do, is essentially irrelevant in 2-3 years.
Call centers and
totally.
all this sort of like the stuff that we're farming out to other countries where they have very little income already is going to just go away, probably.
That's right.
Yeah, and so much depends on demand, and demand, of course, is impacted by basic income. So as I like to point out too, where if we in this world where we don't do a basic income, then there will be a lot of displacement, and yes, we'll create new jobs. People will find new jobs. They may pay a lot less. They may be worse jobs. Some may be better jobs, but overall, you will see this increasing inequality, and that changes the market. And if you have, a lot smaller of a customer base, then that's, the economy looks different because you're basically just catering to those who can still spend, and therefore you're catering to the rich and, the upper middle class and stuff. And you're kind of, the economy is leaving the rest of the people behind. Whereas if you have a basic income, then people can still express demand. And when the entire society can express demand, then that's going to look different as far as what jobs are created, what jobs are available for people, even the volunteering opportunities that people can do because they can actually afford to do things just because they want to instead of for additional money. Like the economy looks much different with the basic income and with automation, depending on, if UBI is there or not.
Yeah, because the picture of automation, a lot of AI propagating the rest of the world without UBI is that's scary. I think that's the dystopia that we should be afraid of. It's not the technology itself. It's the fact that I don't think the West will see quite as much of the disruption that is happening for the rest of the world. And I think that's kind of a scary prospect, because we're going to be sitting here enjoying all the fruits of cool technology, watching our deep fakes of our favorite celebrities. But meanwhile, like, the jobs have been removed from giant sections of the world.
Yeah, kind of like an Elysium situation where,
Yeah.
like the US is the satellite city kind of situation,
Right.
and the rest of the world is,
Yeah.
the rest of the world.
Well, this is where I think emerging markets and developing economies, if they can get the right mindset in place, have an unbelievable opportunity right now. The challenge that I
to
see
kind
when
of
I
like
travel
split the
around
script a little.
is they don't have the mindset to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and it's also why basic income should be seen as a development tool.
Huge.
Like if these countries actually implement a small basic income, then you are making a shit ton of customers, and you're providing capital to a bunch of would-be entrepreneurs. And that's exactly what you need for successful businesses, are both entrepreneurs with capital and less fear of risk of failure, in combination with a bunch of people with money to spend for the exchange of goods and services that they actually want. So, I mean, just imagine, like, all these countries, if they actually introduce a basic income floor, then they're going to see so much better economic development growth than they would be outside of that.
Yeah.
Maybe that introduces, like, instead of an arms race, like a prosperity race, a lack of poverty race.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for, is that, the first countries to do this, both rich and developing, other countries will look at that success and go, oh, well, Brad, we need to do that too.
I'm a little more pessimistic than that.
Yeah.
Because the politics are so crazy. Like, for example, it's very clear that Australia, by taking out assault weapons, was able to cancel out all mass gun deaths. And the US just refuses to look at the data.
Oh yeah, just like with healthcare too.
Exactly. Healthcare is the same. There's this unbelievable ability to stick the head in the sand on this. So there's some reason for kind of concern. I tend to be optimistic, because over time, this stuff will pervade, and if it doesn't happen at the federal level, it'll start to happen at the local level. The only good news I've seen in the US over the last few years is the Supreme Court is pushing more and more stuff down to the state level, which has very bad and very good outcomes in it, meaning people can implement some of this stuff and try it out at that local level.
Yeah, we're even seeing, like, all of the local pilots. There's so many of them now. Like, just they've got tons of data on how successful the direct cash programs are, and I think we're trying to, like, get the word out about that. Yes, this means something, but it's whether it will land on deaf ears is a big question. So we're trying to find the non-deaf ears and give them a way to actually mobilize.
Well, it's also that, how do you get everyone to care if they're not actually involved, or it doesn't impact them? The U in UBI is a great big invitation. Everyone's welcome.
I just want to get into too with the U and UBI. This ties into the other aspect of, like, this immune system kind of thinking, where basic income is this interesting tool that can actually the immune system can orient around. So what I mean by that is, look at Social Security, I think, is a good example of this, and compare that to welfare programs, where Social Security has been around long enough and has been very successful in reducing senior poverty. And the result is that people protect Social Security. Like, you go out and vote accordingly. It's considered third rail. Each party accuses the other party of trying to hurt Social Security, and this is something that people really fight to protect. And the immune system being triggered is somehow getting rid of it. Like, that's what's scary. And I think that, the reason why Social Security is this universal program at age, like everyone expects to get this program when they reach a certain age. So therefore it's in the interest of everyone to protect that program. Whereas, you have a welfare program, no one expects to get that because people believe that as long as you make good decisions, you're not going to be in poverty, you're not going to need help. And so, screw those programs because they're not for me. And so if I believe that if you get a basic income in place, then as long as, and this is, again, it's just stressing the importance of universality, is that a fully universal program means that everyone cares about it. It's like everyone is a white blood cell protecting, the whole against change. And, if you try to apply conditions to a universal program, people will fight against that. And that's, unconditionality is key to basic income. Universality is also key to support unconditionality. It's a very unique, special program that, again, it's tough to get in place. But once you get it in place, I believe that people will fight to protect it instead of it being something where, people fear that, oh, it's going to be some kind of tool of control. Oh, it's going to be utilized by government, to somehow hurt us or whatever. It's like, no, universality protects that. It just has to be universal and conditional.
I love these metaphors with the like illness and the bodily type stuff, and I kind of mix them sometimes. But it's funny to me. Like sometimes I think of a UBI as a virus, where the first time it actually lands somewhere and takes hold, you'll never be able to kill it, and it'll spread just based on its proven efficacy. Then also I'm reminded of with ChatGPT, one of the first things I did, or one of the things I did at one point was like, I wonder if ChatGPT knows who I am. And I said, tell me something, Conrad wrote, and it immediately gave me credit for something Scott wrote, just unapologetically gave me credit for something Scott wrote about the UBI as a social vaccine, where there are different sorts of immune system responses, and maybe with UBI as a social vaccine that makes us resilient to real threats and real danger, we can better.
Really powerful framing. It's a really great framing.
Yeah. we need a consortium on whether
the problem is vaccine is a bad word these days. That's the problem.
I know, it's like one
so
you don't
virus.
say too often. Yeah. I want to get to so we're past the hour, so this is around when we start opening it up to the audience too. And as we do that, I'd also like to bring in the title of the space as we made it was about exponential organizations, and that's a lot of what I think of. Like I read your book after we talked originally, Salim, and it really informed my thinking in the design process for Comingle, and I've brought a lot of these things in, and I think it's just really beneficial to think, like have you do a little walkthrough of what makes an exponential organization, and what are the benefits and what are some examples, because I think it's really it's kind of takes to me building and growth mindset and couples it with more of a grassroots spirit in the way of how you can grow something on people power and how you can leverage infrastructure for way more impact than we would normally anticipate out of some sort of corporation.
And if you want to get specific, you could talk just about our company, since we can get some free advice.
Sure, happy to. Let me just describe this in 2 or 3 ways. Let me describe the model so that people have a sense of it, and then a couple of examples and the outcomes we're seeing, because we now have 10 years of data, right? So for folks that aren't aware, we created the exponential organizations model about 10 years ago. A book was published at this time around 2014. And what we did was we scoured the fastest growing companies in the world and organizations in the world and asked how are they doing it, because we saw that since about 2008, 2010, a new breed of organization was emerging where we've learned how to scale the org structure as fast as you can scale technology. We've never seen that before. Before you had computing on the balance sheet, but now with Amazon Web Services, everything is a variable cost and you can scale organizations. So we looked at 200 of the fastest growing organizations and teased out a model. At the top of that model is what we call an MTP, or a massive transformative purpose, what fundamentally are you trying to solve, problem are you trying to solve, like Google organize the world's information, or Comingle provide a UBI, etc. But then we found 5 externalities that allows people to keep a very small feature footprint and use one or more of these to scale very quickly. So, for example, Uber doesn't hire its own staff. Airbnb is leveraging other people's assets. There's gamification and engagement techniques. There's the use of algorithms. And so those provide a list of externalities that can be leveraged. The leveraging of community and crowd, like XPRIZE leverages the crowd to do its prize competitions, etc. And one or more of those we use to scale very quickly. And you could, if you look at it as the image of a brain, we have 5 externalities that drive the growth. And on the left-hand side of the brain, we have 5 internal mechanisms that manage the control framework and drive culture. So interfaces between yourselves, Uber and its drivers, for example, real-time dashboards, because we're instrumenting everything in real time these days, and make that available to all stakeholders. The whole lean startup thinking and constantly testing assumptions and taking risk inside the organization and constantly learning. Decentralized organization structures, autonomous organization structures, eventually leading to DAOs. And the final one is social technologies like Slack and Yammer and Zoom, et cetera, that allow peer-to-peer collaboration and communication. So that's the model. And we, at the time, it was kind of a hypothesis that this is what we're seeing, and we think this is important. Over the years, we're seeing more and more startups operate on this model. And I'll just give a quick data point. When we did the model originally, we scored the Fortune 100 against this model. We took the 100 biggest companies in the US and analyzed them. We came up with an index. I did a segment on CNBC Squawk Box kind of talking about this and said, this is the Fortune 100 ranked by the agility and flexibility and the scalability of their org structure, right? And so it was a little marketing puff piece at the time. One of our community members had done some work with UBS and said, look, let me run this through a proper stock market engine. And he tracked for 7 years which of the top 10 Fortune 100 that used the attributes in the model the most, and the bottom 10 that used them the least, and then looked at the results. And after 7 years, the top 10 most EXO friendly of the Fortune 100 beat the bottom 10 by like 3x on revenue growth, 6x, like 6 times more profitable, 11 times better return on equity, but shareholder returns, what they call CAGR, compound annual growth rate, total shareholder returns were 40 times higher for the top 10 compared to the bottom 10. Like, you literally can't make it up. We had to triple check the numbers, and we realized we totally created the wrong business model. We should have just created an index fund, and we'd be the highest performing fund like ever. And the broader heuristic is really simple. As the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt will drive market value, right? So we see a bunch of those. The poster child of using the model right now is OpenAI. They created the Beat MTP, which was deliver AGI into the world. They built community by releasing an initial tool set. They're now creating an app store equivalent and creating a platform, an ecosystem business model. And they have dashboards to track everything. They're using algorithms, obviously, aggressively. They're pretty much using all the capabilities in there. And that's one. And Comingle is another great example of that with an MTP, the heavy use of community and crowd. Obviously, the use of algorithms and dashboards.
Lots of dashboards. Yeah, definitely dashboard heavy.
Right. The issue here, I think, with Comingle is you're trying to do something for society, but doing it from the private sector side, and that's just a hard thing to bootstrap, but totally necessary because freaking governments aren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that's the EXO model. It applies very well to UBI just because you're enabling the crowd to then seek out their own passions. And I think once you have UBI implemented, it's really easy then to hire people that line up between the company's MTP and their individual MTP.
It's funny to me when we talk about UBI in progressive spaces or in other spaces, there's all this pushback like, no, we need to get, universal healthcare first, or democratic voting, reform first, or whatever first, and then UBI. And it's just that my twofold answer is, one, there's 300 million of us, we can multitask. And two, with a structure of financial security under everybody, then every single fight becomes easier. Similarly, I think with universal healthcare, the more you take people's heads out of their scarcity, the more they can support every single one of these important measures. So why think about doing one first rather than which ones are the ones that are essential to this sort of exponential growth curve we're looking to hit by leveraging the passion and the talent of a people that has had sort of, as Andrew Yang would say, I guess, the boot taken off of their throat.
Yeah, the challenge there is, it turns out there's a lot of, and this is what we tease out in the second edition of the book that we just released, is that there's a lot of interdependencies between the models, between the attributes. So for example, GE trained 60,000 managers on lean startup thinking. It was the biggest corporate training exercise in the history of business, and it failed. Why? Because there's no point teaching people on experimentation if they don't have autonomy, right? Or they don't have an MTP. And so it turns out there's a lot of interdependencies, and the sequence in which you implement things becomes pretty critical in this case. And the best, one of the funnest anecdotes I have is a public company in Australia called Smart Group. And what they do is every quarter they have 10 projects reflecting the 10 attributes, and every quarter they just re-up the projects. And so everybody, 10 people in the company will say, this quarter, I'll take on implementing dashboards and implement it into some part of the business. So they're constantly refreshing the business on an ongoing basis. And I think that's where we'll end up with organizational structures over time.
I want to shout out that Giselle just showed up from Gerald Fund for Humanity. We maybe she heard her ears burning when we shouted her out before. I remember when Salim said something like, Giselle stood up at the Abundance Conference, and she's a hard person not to listen to, and that's what we've always found. I'm thinking if there's people waiting to speak, we can start having people ask questions.
Well, yeah,
and
Adam
if not, we can just let Giselle go for a little while.
Adam has been waiting. Let's get to Adam. Adam, do you have a question for Salim or just a comment around the discussion that we've been having?
Yeah, sure. So one of my concerns is the idea that people become unemployed, like people that earn different amounts get unemployed at the same time. So you have like one person earning 100K per year, getting unemployed, can't find a new job. So there's that situation. And then you have somebody making 40K per year, getting unemployed. So like how, like, it feels like UBI, like as I understand it now, like the different programs just give a flat amount to every case. It's like a one size fits all model. And I feel like that could generate a lot of conflict. And have you all thought about any like more kind of like graceful transition where like, that 100K earner, gets that amount for a while, and then like there's a slow transition over the course of like 5 years to the point where everybody's like getting the same amount? Like, have you thought about that at all? Or
I'll throw out two quick ones. One is we were working with a large company in Mexico, and they realized they wanted to lay off about several hundred people to meet their needs. And instead of just laying them off, they actually gave them a UBI type structure for 2 years. So they had time to find jobs, find their passion, and essentially just paid for their basic needs for a couple of years. So that was really fascinating to see a company with some heart. And because there's a family-owned business, they wanted to take care of the people delivering that. That's one. The second one that I've seen that's interesting is, can you put some sort of a tax on AI and reroute that tax to the people into a UBI? So for example, if we do automate truck driving, can we put a small tax on that productivity increase and reroute that back to drivers and give them a basic cushion? So those are the two, and I'm sure Scott and team have seen others.
Yeah, so my answer would be that, a basic income is just this universal foundational floor that's always there. And I think it's really important that it's always there, because in the existing system, you have these conditional programs that people think are there for them and aren't. So unemployment is a good example. Unemployment insurance. And
Basically, what he
so,
was describing is unemployment insurance and how it works.
right. So the way unemployment insurance works is, you have this job, and then depending on the amount of income that you have for your job, then you're able to receive some percentage of that income. This varies by state and stuff too. But it also requires you to have, been paying into the system for long enough, to have had that job for long enough. And so, and it's temporary. So, if you were able to get it, so that's also an important part. So right now, you can maybe you become unemployed. Let's say it's thanks to automation. Let's say you've been replaced by AI or whatever, and so you are eligible to apply for unemployment. And about 40% of the people who were unemployed will be able to actually get unemployment insurance. So already with the UBI floor, you're making sure that the other 60% fall to the UBI level instead of zero. And then the second thing is then you get this temporary unemployment insurance, and this exists on top of the UBI. So, if you were at if you had like a $60,000 a year job, and let's say the UBI is 15,000 or something, and then let's say, thanks to the unemployment income, you only fall to say 40 something or 50,000 or something like that, for this duration of the time that you're given to find the next job. And so, yeah, that is the purpose of unemployment insurance, is to help bridge that gap. And so you do want to make sure that that program still exists to help bridge that gap, because people do have these variants in incomes. But also, the unemployment insurance doesn't need to be as high now anymore with basic income too, because right now the unemployment income is meant to, keep you this far above the zero line, and then with basic income it'll be, this far above the basic income line. And that's what people really need to understand, that basic income was just this the foundation that's always there, and we just don't have that right now. It does not exist.
I've got a couple of things I'd like to add to that too. Is this any amount of money that you're targeting in some way, that you're conditionalizing, adds the unintended consequences of the disincentives that are coupled with it. So right now, like in the pandemic, we had people getting $600 a week extra in the form of unemployment insurance, which is quite literally being paid not to work, where they're making more money or as much money or even a fraction of as much money by staying at home. It's not laziness that keeps people from going back into the job market. It's self-interest. It's smart. We're setting up this system that actually punishes you for pursuing work in the workplace.
The difference I see there is when you have, say, a tax for wealthy people, mostly they squirrel it away in the assets, and that money doesn't flow back into the economy easily. Whereas when you provide, even if we're overpaying on the pandemic credits, most of that money flows right back into the economy. And so there's some benefit that comes from that. But your broader point is taken. The challenge with UBI that I've heard framed best is you want to find that sweet spot between where people can survive and not be happy.
Yeah, that's very important.
And you could use an algorithmic approach to find that level and constantly tweak the number every, say, year or so that people are still totally motivated to. This is where the evidentiary data is overwhelming. For the experiments that we've seen that have hit that number, the results are just staggeringly good. It's just unbelievably good. So you literally can't even believe your eyes how great the outcome is when you hit that level.
Right, and then employment can even increase, which is what kind of blows people's minds, and they don't believe it because everyone thinks that people get lazy with basic income. But also, they're not recognizing that how difficult it is to actually find a job, to find a better job, if you don't have any resources to find that job, and if you don't have the security to take the risks to find that job.
I think it's also important to address like the fairness sorts of issues that Adam was bringing up. And for me, if you're telling me about someone who earns 100K and loses their job versus someone earning 40K, person earning 100K is far more likely to have savings, and the purpose of UBI being something that you can earn on top of, find a new job, or bring in income from other places and supplement it, is to make sure everyone has a baseline of being okay, not that everyone enjoys the same comfort they have at some other point in their life. So introducing not only the bureaucracy and the inefficiency of some sort of conditionalized delivery, also I think institutes a whole different form of unfairness and injustice. Just because someone has happened to be in a position to be earning more money at some point in their life doesn't mean they deserve a better life, like with a better income at the basic level.
You got more questions?
Aaron, you're up next. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a question for Salim or a comment about what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I had a question for Salim. I was just curious about when I've been looking at Tesla a lot, and specifically a lot. I was just curious if he had any thoughts or comments, particularly around deflation. And you look at almost anything, labor or any business, labor is typically one of the biggest costs.
Tesla as a company, you mean?
Well, or just the impact of something like a Tesla bot and its deflationary, potential in the economy.
Yeah.
If you look at Elon, he's worked a lot this year to bring down prices.
Sure.
And pass along savings.
Yeah. So let me comment on that. There's 2 or 3 comments here. First, I've never for people, because I've been close to this situation, people have been asking me, wow, you must have done really well. You must have invested in Tesla. And the answer is no, because for 5 years, every quarter, he looked like he was about to run out of money and came incredibly close a couple of times. So are you going to put your money in that situation? Probably not. Then the thing explodes and you're like, Jesus Christ, what the hell happened to this thing? Right. But underlying, he kind of lives it. And there's a really important shout out to his mindset, because he operates on a very, very simple MO, which is an exponential mindset. What Elon does, he'll take a technology that's exponential, say battery technology or solar energy or neural links or whatever. Where will that technology be on a 10-year doubling pattern? And then build a company to intercept that curve over 10 years, because it kind of takes 10 years to build a global company. And he just rinses or repeats over and over again. Now, the Tesla power bot, the Tesla bot itself, I think initially it's kind of like Google with their Google car. It's kind of a toy, a strategic toy, and for the foreseeable future, he'll be tinkering around with it, saying, okay, there's some specific use cases, but it's unbelievably hard to do robotics. So, for example, if you close your eyes and touch the tip of your nose with your finger with your eyes closed, that's a concept in movement called proprioception. Turns out it's incredibly easy for human beings to do this. It's unbelievably difficult to program a robot to do that. You need like tens of thousands of instructions, sensors, multiple cameras at multiple angles, because the robot doesn't have an innate sense of self to say, where is my finger at some point in time with my eyes closed. So doing a robot is very, very hard. And I'm going to just take a little tangent here into some of the commentary we once had at Singularity University, where we had a faculty member who was trying to build robots, and his wife, who's a neuroscientist, looks at him and says, what the hell are you doing? And he goes, I'm trying to build a robot that'll be self-sufficient. And she takes him out into the garden and says, show me what has a brain versus what doesn't have a brain. And he's looking around, and she finally cuffs him over the head and said, look, if you notice, anything that moves around in the world has a brain. If you don't need to move around in the world like a tree, you may have a nervous system equivalent, but you don't have a brain. You only need a brain to physically adapt to physical environments and adapt to those and extract resources or whatever from it. So we've taken 4 billion years to evolve to this point. It'll take a few more generations, in my opinion, for robots and bots to get to that level. Not that we won't. Now, a Tesla bot is going to cost quite a lot of money. And in the short term, certainly for the foreseeable future, we used to talk about autonomous driving this way, where we said, the you don't need human intelligence to drive a car. You need horse intelligence. And frankly, the easiest way of creating an autonomous horse is to get a male horse and a female horse, and you create a free horse. And you just have to feed it a bit of hay. And so there's a case to be made here that the delicate nimbling plumbing, for just being a plumber, for example, I think is one of those tasks that we idealize that great if robots could do it, but in reality, it'll be unbelievably difficult to do. So I think where the bot will come into useful use is say things like mining, where you are in a very extreme environment and you don't want to put human beings into that environment, or undersea exploration or things like that, but not for day-to-day tasks for the foreseeable future. Sorry, that was just a bit of a rant on a soapbox.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So
TLDR,
I have high enthusiasm. I don't see the short-term practical need for it right now, but I've been wrong many times before.
Yeah, especially in terms of people-shaped robots. Like there's a lot of robots that can be made to suit specific purposes, and that can utilize AI to do some pretty cool things, like say Flippy in a fast food restaurant.
And let me flip just to the other side of that argument just for a second. If you're familiar with Baxter, which is a stock picking robot, the magical thing about Baxter was that in industrial robotics, you always had to program the robot to say, pick up widgets, swivel 90 degrees, turn this way, put it down over here. And you had to program it, and just to do that task repeatedly, accept. Baxter was magical because you didn't have to program it. You literally would move its arms to show it what to do, and then it would replicate that movement. And so that was a massive breakthrough in humanoid robotics that I think the bot is copying some of those capabilities. Then you have some incredible things like Saul Griffith has created a pneumatic robot that has uses air pressure to move its arms around. And instead of like super expensive sensors and all the pneumatics in motors, etc., it just used air pressure and could do something at 1/100th the cost and achieve 95% of the same functionality. So there's some unbelievable advances taking place, but it's one of those where the use cases are going to be very limited for the foreseeable future.
I'd also like to add to this discussion too that again, like what we're seeing is the result of the intersection of supply and demand, where I would say that human labor is artificially cheap. We have to work for our survival, and as long as we do that, we lack the bargaining power to demand higher wages. And as long as there's like a really low minimum wage and low bargaining power, then people are entirely willing to work to do a job that an existing robot could do just fine. But as long as the economics are that the human is cheaper, then the employer is just going to hire the human. And so if we create a situation where people are less willing to sell their labor for so cheap, then it suddenly makes a lot more sense for employers to actually invest in automation. And that's the outcome that I would prefer to see. If there's a job that robots could do just fine, then they should do that. And I think part of the issue, we aren't automating as fast as we can utilizing the technologies that we have, because people just have to scratch in order to survive, instead of actually having some choice in the matter and determining how much they'll work for or where.
I want to say that this is not like a science fiction discussion. There is literally a robotic food delivery robot that runs up and down our streets. There's like 4 or 5 of them just here in LA. And you go past them and you're like, that is the cutest thing I've ever seen. There's no the first thought is like, oh my God, I love that. It's got little eyes, it blinks, it kind of like moves around. People are stopping to get their pictures taken with it. And then eventually you're like, I guess that just took somebody's job. But there's no resistance to the concept at all. It's when you actually see it in practice, it's very exciting and fun. So I don't know what that means, but
in Phoenix now, most of the taxis are autonomous cars.
Yeah, right.
It's already here.
And are people enthusiastic? Is it fun when you
in
get
general?
into
The
one?
car's just damn slow. because
Okay.
it looks every stop sign comes to a full stop, which no human driver ever does, etc.
But yeah, I mean, I do. You sit there and wonder, like, well, that was a job that some delivery guy, and there are people that
Yeah,
need
but
jobs
for
on that
those
same
jobs,
street that
this
are.
is why we need a UBI, because for
Yeah.
most of those jobs, people don't do them because they want to do them; they do them
Right.
because they have to, right?
Yeah, that's the thing that bothers me is like people are defending, saying like I don't use the auto checkout at the stores because that's a person's job, and it's like I see the person at the cash register sitting there every day dealing with grumpy customers and just beep, 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 swipe your credit card, and it's like that person, I don't care who they are, could be doing something more fulfilling for themselves, more productive for society, more whatever for whoever than sitting there. It's like the same with people who are sitting in a lobby staring at the wall waiting to make sure no one walks in. Like that is a human being with a brain and a passion and an intelligence that can do a lot more than occupy a space and try not to fall asleep.
Look,
I mean,
the three countries with the highest penetration of robotics in the world are South Korea, Japan, Sweden, and Germany. And the lowest unemployment countries in the world are Japan, South Korea, Sweden, Germany, because there's just so much more work to be done in increased efficiency, problem solving, exception handling, etc. That we've seen this. We've never seen the opposite, where we suddenly have mass numbers of people out of work. And maybe the easiest example is agriculture. If you went back to 1900, 98% of the U.S. economy worked in agriculture, and today it's like 1.8%, because we keep inventing new jobs. The latest one being prompt engineer, that we never had before.
Well, I like how that one almost got automated away almost instantly.
It will be very fast. Because an AI will read your thoughts and say, yeah, I get what you're thinking.
I always do point out, too, though, that oh, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Never mind. Move on with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the robot on my street, like I saw it actually going past a homeless guy lying on that same street. And like, but I think that's the thing that's most exciting to me about technology is like, it kind of calls into question like how we've structured our livelihoods at all. And it immediately brings up like, well, maybe that guy didn't actually need a job to keep him alive. Maybe that's not the thing that we should be relying on to ensure that we have some dignity in the world. Like, well, and imagine, is there dignity in going to and like delivering somebody's food? It's like,
well, well, imagine the genius guitar player that can't express playing the guitar because they're stuck delivering food because they have no other way of making money.
Right, and then you call that into question. Like,
releases unbelievable creativity into the world, human creativity.
Right, but now you're up against the fact that there's now a robot or program out there that will make the music that could have supported that guy's livelihood. So it's like, possibly, okay, so now what do we do? Right?
Yeah, but what we've seen is when we digitize stuff, like when video conferencing first came around, people thought, well, this will be end of all conferences because people will just never go to a conference. Well, it turns out it's more popular than ever because that face-to-face scarcity becomes the more valued part. So what will happen with music is the live performances, like, as we've seen as we digitize music, the live performances have become the really magical part of that. And musicians are now making more money than ever before. So this is the pattern that we tend to see in most cases.
Yeah, I believe that with automation that we're going to see a human premium where, people will choose, again, if they have the money to spend to express their demand, they will choose to spend more money for the human experience, and let's say the automated public, the automated good or service will just be the cheaper option.
Well, that reminds me what I forgot I was going to say is about the idea of work, all the fear of people losing work and all the work going away. And I always bristle a little at that because it basically conflates jobs and work. Whereas I think of jobs as a subset of work and life is work, right? Everything you want to do with your time, like the engineering definition of work is moving an object with a mass a distance. whatever you're spending your time and energy and effort on is a form of work. It's just a question of whether or not it's compensated by a consumer or an employer. And if we have a form of compensation that doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a consumer or an employer, then we can much better broaden the definition of work to include all the things you spend your time doing, for your family, for yourself, for your community, that isn't part of the labor market.
Like we're worried that automation is going to take away all of our jobs. It's like, that's the whole point. We don't want to have to sit there and like do manual labor and dedicate our lives to being somebody else's, tool in their machine. So like maybe now we can actually be more human.
Let's get to another audience question. Zachary, do you have a question for Salim or a comment about what we're talking about?
First off, thanks guys for hosting such a great space. This has been fun.
Thanks, Zachary.
I'm curious, Salim, you mentioned like AI is getting 1,000 times better year over year. And with exponential organizations, like there kind of becomes like a coordination problem with like signal and noise. And if people get UBI, then they'll be freed up to work collectively on things that matter. So I'm curious if you have any solutions to signal to noise. Even here on Twitter, it's like the replies are it's a real problem.
Yeah, great question. I don't have a clear answer for it. We certainly have a lot of noise. And the heuristics on how we filter is going to be real. Actually, where I'm thinking we'll end up is an AI type filter to filter some of that signal to noise. And by watching our reaction and our attention, you just have to make damn sure that AI filter is benevolent and you own it rather than it being watched over by somebody else, right? Like, for example, today, we rely on the Twitter algorithm to deliver us tweets that it thinks we want to see, or we said I want to follow these people. Well, it'd be more interesting to have your own personal bot filter the Twitter overall feed and give you things that are a little more serendipitous or a little more fact-based if you're a reporter tracking the news, or a little bit more celebrity focused, etc. And you have some dials and knobs that you can tweak to say, I want my feed to have a little more of this, a little less of that. And I think that's where we're going to end up with a series of bots that we tweak for our own selves. And we kind of have that, but now we have the Web 2 giants creating that filter for maximizing their business model, not necessarily for my benefit. And look at the damage that's done to society in terms of radicalization.
That's hugely important to me, is the idea that I think what ruins a lot of these companies is the need to make a profit and endlessly grow because of the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, because of this need for... So one of the things we want to do as we build out our structure, our legal structure, is completely divorce ourselves from that by saying, Comingle gets its money as a utility fee. 1% of all the money that goes through, at a certain scale, that becomes more than we need, and we can start recycling that towards public benefit, towards people. But how can we do that? Only if we write it into our bylaws that we're not allowed to spend it any other way, that we're not allowed to enrich ourselves or any shareholders in any specific way, that we're required to spend that money toward cool new features, cool new tools, initiatives that are public benefit. I don't really see another way to avoid the paradigm where if there is a profit motive, everything turns toward profit, which is sort of, to me, what breaks all these social media models and even these algorithms. I think, the futuristic dream I have is maybe an AI or something like that determines when and how you would like to receive ads, such that any ads are essentially illegal until you request them. Like this whole dystopian thing to me that we've all accepted is that in my mailbox, my physical mailbox, in my email mailbox, in my text inbox, on my phone, it's mostly a delivery mechanism for ads and scams and things like that are entirely unsolicited. And the algorithm for getting them to me is completely extractive, and it's completely abusive. Whereas there is a value to having ads. When I want a new thing, I want to find it and get it, and I want the best thing made available to me. at the point when I choose to want it. So I'm like, do you think we can get to that sort of a thing? And can it happen in the sorts of companies we have today that make their money off of ads and have to keep making more and more?
Right. I think it's a really good, it's a good question of like, how are we going to start filtering with all this information coming at us? What are the filters going to be that get us the information we want? And like, I think that the picture that you just described, Salim, is kind of, I like that. There's something that's is putting the focus, is asking people, what do you actually care about? What are you actually interested in? You're a person here. It's like, it's very freeing, that idea.
And it's got to be kind of owned and open source for you, right?
Yeah.
Then you can maintain privacy. You have agency. Right now, when we have Twitter, or Facebook, or TikTok, we don't have a lot of agency. We're essentially being programmed rather than an agent helping program the content for your benefit. That's where I think the signal to noise becomes powerful. I think the other part, and I just want to reference back to exponential organizations for a second, is the economic thesis of an EXO is that while the internet and online marketing and referral marketing allowed us to drop the cost of customer acquisition to near zero, and it goes to zero if you find a viral loop, is EXOs have figured out how to drop the marginal cost of supply to near zero. Right, so if you think about Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to the inventory is near zero. Whereas if you're Hyatt, you have to build a hotel. And what I think AI allows us to do is, in many, many information-based environments, drop the marginal cost of supply to zero. So, for example, the areas where I'm incredibly excited about it are education, where I should have a world-class tutor providing me an education at near zero cost, or healthcare. I think doctors are toast for the most part going forward. And there's some lawyers, same thing. The highest paid professional occupations are the ones that are most at risk, which I find bizarrely ironic and magical in a weird way.
Yeah. So, I mean, a big question we have that we always get into is like, just how do we make a company that's able to survive without it being this extractive type of model? That how can we do it without ads? How can we do it without, trying to harness people's attention? Like, and so we'd love to talk about that. We look at OpenAI a lot as an example. So.
Yeah, the secret there is an MTP. Once you have a massive purpose, let's say it's curing cancer. I'll give you the quick rundown here. For building an EXO, you first select your MTP. What problem space do you want to be in? Then you join communities. Let's say it's curing cancer. There's a ton of meetups and whatever trying to solve that problem. Patients like me, patient groups, etc. Then you, from that community of people, you find a founding team. And step 4 is a breakthrough product or service that's minimum 10x better than the marketplace. And then you follow lean startup thinking till you get to product market fit, and then you implement the rest of the scale and ideas attributes in the EXO model. That's the tested, tried and true model for building an EXO. And if you follow that model, by definition, you're kind of operating on a circular economy, benefit to society type of model. And everybody wins. It becomes a win-win kind of triple bottom line outcome.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a tough one to crack because it's, we're not really trying to do something that other people are doing, or that it's not really like the demand is not there in terms of like a market demand, right? There's a bigger demand that's coming from, that's not like at an individual level, right? Like if you look purely individually, purely at self-interest, being part of Comingle is only going to be good for you when you're getting money, right? And so we're trying to it requires a certain shift in mindset to even succeed, right?
Yeah.
So we're having this so it's the first step in that is for us as a company to be a company that is able to survive on this new mindset, right?
Yeah.
That there's like inherent generosity that is good for all of us, right? I don't know. So.
Well, we will be immediately at least 10x better than everything else in the market because no one else.
That's
is
true.
doing
There's well, and I guess also if you consider the market to be like the market of like charitable giving tools, it's also better than that.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left, and Giselle is with us, so I really want to get to Giselle. Giselle, thanks for being here. It's great to see you.
It's good to hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right. Well, so I have a more philosophical question to ask, and that is in terms of AI. I mean, we live in a world that is where we are no longer able to come up with solutions that fit the times. We live in paradigms that are no longer viable. And what I want to know is whether AI can be applied to redesign the world we live in, our economic system, our political systems, in a very fundamental way that would help us actually be what we're supposed to be, the thinking animal.
So I have a positivity bias when it comes to technology, so just take that into account. When you see AI depicted in Hollywood, it's always dystopian. You have the Terminator, the Matrix, the Skynet, and the robot overlords take over the world. If we're lucky, we're treated like pets, and if we're unlucky, we're food. Like pretty much that's the paradigm how it's displayed. Except what we actually see is a very, very different. Take PageRank, Google's algorithm for crawling web pages, is evolving a completely orthogonal and complementary intelligence to human intelligence, not replicative. And I think we'll see that with AI. And I think we'll be able to ask AI the answer to many of those questions that you raised, Giselle, in terms of how do you structure society. Like, for example, if you wanted to figure out monetary policy and how do we drop interest rates to half the level they are, the AI will have access to much more data and much more analysis than the human brain can comprehend, and therefore will tell you tweak these knobs and dials to get it there. I think where we'll end up is the chess scenario, where today the best chess players are a human being that delivers intuitive thinking plus the robot that crunches chess moves 16 levels out type of thing. And that combination turns out to be the most powerful. A chess computer on its own is not good enough to beat a combination human and being. And I think that's what we'll see in healthcare and other areas. And if you say, let's use the Middle East war as an example, what are the mechanisms that would reduce human casualties? An AI today would probably look at that entire war theater and come up with a much better outcome. It would say, close these gates over here, block these arms shipments over there, destroy those 5 tunnels, and pull back the settlers from these 10% most egregious West Bank environments, and that'll cover 50% of what you're trying to do. Whereas a human being can't get to that. The second level challenge you have is, let's say an AI comes with some suggestion, you'll have the human immune system response, which, as we've seen, is worst in religion ever. And now you have to deal with that. So it hits a couple of different levels. I tend to be enthusiastic about the future. How we get there is unclear.
But this is not something that you hear people talk about.
Zero.
And to me, it seems to be the thing that we should be concentrating on.
Well, I think you have to do it in a way, in a very subtle way that implements some of these ideas without it being kind of talked about or noticed. I'll give you an example. The entire Ukraine-Russia war has actually been prosecuted by 500,000 drones that are in the sky. It's not actually a land war. It's a drone war. And so you don't hear that commentary much because most people haven't noticed that. But if you go back, 100 years ago, the amount of casualties would be 100x what we have today. And so there's some good in the chaos that's there, but bad in the terms of it's still a freaking war.
Uh-huh.
Wow, yeah, it's like it'll happen without us noticing is kind of what you're saying. Is that what you think?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a sort of.
I think it is happening, and we're not noticing.
I have a forced optimistic fatalism about it, where I even wrote a screenplay where the end all bad guy of this series is AI. No one knows what's going to happen. They're afraid to launch it, and in the end, the AI is the only thing that can save ourselves from ourselves. Based on, I just look at as we get, I guess, more evolved, more intelligent, or we learn more things, we become more appreciative of beauty in life and human rights and things like that. So the idea of something instantly becoming 1,000 times more intelligent than us, like still obeying its primitive, prime directive that we've given it is almost absurd to me. Where it's like, why wouldn't it, appreciate beauty as well? Why wouldn't it appreciate, life in general and be a benevolent figure? But that's also, like I said, sort of a fatalism, in that I don't really see a way to stop it from happening. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for, I guess.
I have a data point that is very encouraging around all this.
All right.
When in the early 2000s, when we first had platforms like Craigslist and eBay, where you could equally do a positive transaction as opposed to a fraudulent transaction. Like on eBay, I can put up a picture of a MacBook. Somebody sends me $1,000 and I'm off to Fiji, type of thing. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard to mask my email address, right? So sociologists and anthropologists, as these systems arose, realized for the first time you could study human nature at scale. And so they study these systems to say, okay, what's the actual ratio of good to bad? And it's pretty staggering. It turns out consistently across those systems, Craigslist, eBay, whatever, the ratio of positive to fraudulent transactions was consistently something like 8,000 to 1.
What? Oh.
Yeah. Yes. So that gives you some interesting data that, given the choice, most people will do the right thing. So if that holds true for other technologies, say drones, our first response as a society is ban the drones because somebody might load it up with C4 and fly into the White House until we figure out how to modulate all that. Whereas a bad actor is not listening to the regulations anyway, and all you do is crush all the good innovation. What we should be doing is saying, okay, if we believe that 8,000 to 1 ratio or anywhere near it within 3 orders of magnitude, let anybody do whatever they want with drones, and we'll police the bad use cases.
Well, there's also the idea that, and Scott writes really well about this with his big red button example, but there's the idea that this 8,000 to 1 is in an environment where there's a lot of poverty and scarcity and need and want and everything that comes out of that. I had a revelation a couple of months ago where my dad was telling me how he was starting to get spam emails that were really believable from people purporting to be his bank. And it's sort of this cognitive dissonance hit me that I've been nurturing for years. Like, we've had spam emails for years. How come they're always so easy to detect? How come you can always see the misspellings, and it seems like any con artist worth their salt could much more easily trick me. Why has this not happened? And sort of this implication to me, this hopeful implication, is that the number of people who, even despite need and want and the world out there, that want to do harm to others is vanishingly small. And the way we perceive the world through the outrage media and sensationalism that we see, and our selective memory of the bad things rather than the things that work out, really exacerbates our understanding of how many people are doing these hurtful, harmful things. What if it really is like a fraction of a percent? And that those voices are the ones that get super amplified, like here on Twitter. So what we're really doing when people ask us with Comingle, how are you going to get people to really believe in that or do that? Everyone's selfish. I'm excited to test this theory and say, let's just give people an opportunity to show how much they want things to work out, and a robust and safe mechanism, and see if they teach us something new about human nature.
Yeah, I love hearing that there was an actual study of how dishonest people have been. That 8,000 to 1 is those are good odds. I like hearing that, and
it's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah,
from a technology, but it's very depressing that every time a new technology comes along, our entire regulatory squash the technology until we understand it, which takes on average 20 years to get the benefit. I know we're way over time, but there's a crazy old story about in the 1600s about this disease, vitamin C deficiency, right? Can I tell the story real quick?
Yeah. We can go over a few minutes.
We're hanging around.
Scurvy was a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. Your teeth would fall out and stuff like that. in I think it was 1664 that a Scottish guy definitively found the cure that was just eating lemons or oranges. He tells the Navy, "Hey, I found this cure." Navy doesn't believe him for 50 years. Finally, they implement it. They take 50 years to then tell the Merchant Navy, "By the way, we found the answer to this thing." The Merchant Navy doesn't believe it and takes 50 years. And it turned out to be 150 years before a known solution was fully implemented. Meanwhile, 40% of sailors are dying on these voyages, right? It was like a total. So the actual number is 264 years between full known cure and full deployment of that cure. Okay. Now we've shrunk that a lot. Now it's down to about 17 years, but it's still 17 years between knowing that this treatment or drug will solve this cancer and us getting it into distribution. And the question is, how can we shrink that? And because the potential of us solving most of our issues with some of the breakthrough healthcare issues plus UBI type structures is pretty much near infinite. We could go to an abundance utopian type of environment within a decade or two. And the way we frame it is we have a Star Trek future or a Mad Max future in front of us. Yeah. And our politicians are driving us straight towards Mad Max. And how can we tilt that? That's kind of more structured future.
That's the timeline I see starting the day that some country somewhere implements a UBI in a good way, in a healthy way. That sort of virus analogy I had from before. Yeah. The day that happens is like that's when we start that 17-year cycle where it spreads. And even the Americas, with our stubbornness, will have to we'll have to come around to it eventually.
I mean, I don't think it has to be at a country level. I think if we get the first group of people that we get on Comingle was going to be, I hope, the start of that will start to spread. So,
we're kickstarting it.
But back to something else you said, that I just want to like people were very quick to adopt things like Craigslist and Airbnb and Uber. People were like, the idea of getting into a car with a stranger is really freaky at first. Like how did that switch happen so quickly, right? That we were able to not care about the potential for fraud, right? Like it became something people were willing to just accept.
Just convenience overwhelms all. Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I think it's it's not that we're going to do the right thing. We're always going to do the easier thing, right? The lowest effort thing. I don't know.
Well, yeah, we are past time, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Salim for being here, and every listener for being here. Conrad, did you want to end up with our exiting comments?
Our little rundown of.
Wait, I want to have a 20-second rant.
Yeah, you go.
Yes, for sure.
I just want to acknowledge Scott, you, and Conrad, and Giselle for the unrelenting enthusiasm for UBI. It's really great to have that drum be beaten kind of nonstop and relentlessly, and the world so badly needs it. I tend to have my attention pulled in 15 different directions, but it's an incredible comfort to me you guys are focusing so deeply on this because it really needs to be done.
Thanks. After your comment, I feel right now like I'm a guy with a lime, and I'm just telling everybody eat the lime, eat it,
eat the lime. Yeah. Good point.
Okay, so following that up with a bunch of plugs, we have some comments in the stuff below that says other ways to get involved. But obviously following us all over on our profiles on Twitter is a good one. Going to our pages, Comingle and .us and itsafoundation.org, getting on the mailing lists. Check out our YouTube page for Comingle. We have a lot of fun content coming out there. And our Indiegogo page is also in there. And like I said, we're building a movement, and what we need is people. So even $1, join our list, because the size of our list is very important when it comes to raising further funding. And also when we launch, it's our future base of Cominglers.
Thanks, Conrad. And a reminder to everyone that we will not be here this Wednesday. This show is to take place this Wednesday, so we'll be back next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern. Again, thank you, Salim, so much for being here and having this great discussion.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Long overdue and great to have been here.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye then.